Thomas Matthew Crooks, a name etched in infamy. He was once just a boy born into a world that seemed indifferent to his existence.
My family life was tumultuous. My parents, burdened by their own struggles, grappled with unemployment and marital discord.
Young Thomas often found himself caught in the crossfire. He retreated inward, seeking refuge from the chaos that surrounded him.
There was a palpable sense of disconnect. We were consumed by our problems and failed to recognize the silent cries for help from our son.
He became invisible, a ghost haunting the periphery of his own home. The seeds of isolation were sown early. They would later blossom into something far more sinister.
As a child, Thomas sought solace in the digital world. It was an escape, a portal to realms where he could shed his invisibility.
Video games became my refuge. I disappeared for hours, losing myself in virtual battles and online personas. The line between reality and fantasy blurred.
The internet offered him more than just entertainment. It provided a sense of community, albeit a distorted one.
I stumbled upon online forums and chat groups. These were populated by individuals who, like me, felt alienated and misunderstood. I found kinship in their shared grievances and frustrations. I was no longer alone in my anger.
School was a constant reminder of his isolation. Thomas was the quiet kid, the one who always sat in the back of the class.
I rarely spoke, my silence a shield against a world that seemed determined to ignore me.
His classmates found him strange, his lack of social graces and awkward demeanor setting him apart. He was an easy target for bullies, their taunts and jeers only deepening his sense of alienation.
Teachers, overwhelmed by their own workloads, failed to notice my struggles. They saw only a withdrawn and unmotivated student, not a young man grappling with profound emotional turmoil. My grades plummeted. I retreated further into myself, my silence growing more impenetrable. I was trapped in a downward spiral, and no one seemed to notice.
Thomas's online world became increasingly extreme. He gravitated towards forums and websites known for their hateful rhetoric and violent imagery.
I consumed this content voraciously, my mind absorbing the poisonous ideology like a sponge. I found a perverse sense of belonging in these digital echo chambers.
His views, once shaped by isolation and despair, now hardened into something far more dangerous.
The online world, once an escape, now fueled my anger and resentment. I became fixated on conspiracy theories. I saw enemies everywhere, their faces morphing into those I encountered in my daily life. I was radicalized in the shadows.
The internet, a tool of connection and communication, had become a weapon in the hands of a troubled young man. Section 5. The Breaking Point. From online rage to real-world violence. The line between Thomas's online life and reality dissolved completely. His online rhetoric became increasingly violent, filled with threats and calls for action. He was no longer content with simply observing from the sidelines.
I wanted to make a statement, to leave my mark on the world. I began to see myself as a soldier in a righteous war, fighting against the forces I believed were destroying my country.
His online activity attracted the attention of law enforcement. His social media posts, filled with hate speech and veiled threats, raised red flags. But by then, it was too late. Thomas was already planning his attack. He had chosen a target, a symbol of the system he believed had failed him. He was determined to make his voice heard, even if it meant silencing others forever. Section 6, July 13, 2024. A day of terror and its aftermath. July 13, 2024. A day forever etched in infamy. Thomas Matthew Crooks, armed and fueled by hate, carried out a meticulously planned attack. The details, too gruesome to recount here, sent shockwaves across.
The target, President Trump, became a scene of carnage. An innocent life was lost, and many others were changed forever in a senseless act of violence.
The nation watched in horror as the events unfolded on their television screens. The images, raw and visceral, seared themselves into the collective consciousness. The attack dominated headlines, pushing aside all other news. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the ever-present threat of extremism. Section 7. A nation in shock. The political fallout and public outcry. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom of grief, anger, and disbelief. The nation mourned the victims, their names and faces becoming symbols of a tragedy that touched countless lives. Politicians from all sides offered condolences and condemned the attack.
But their words rang hollow for many, drowned out by the cries for justice and accountability.
The attack ignited a fierce debate about gun control, internet censorship, and the very nature of extremism. Some called for stricter laws, arguing that such tragedies could have been prevented. Others defended individual liberties, warning against government overreach. The nation, already deeply divided, seemed to fracture even further in the wake of the tragedy. Section 8. Unanswered questions, Senate hearings, and security failures. The attack on July 13, 2024, triggered a wave of investigations and inquiries. Senate hearings were convened, aiming to dissect the events leading up to the tragedy and identify any systemic failures.
Law enforcement officials, intelligence analysts, and tech executives were called to testify. They faced a barrage of questions from lawmakers eager to understand how such a horrific event could have occurred.
The hearings revealed a series of missed warning signs and critical security lapses. Thomas Crooks, despite his online activity and extremist views, had managed to slip through the cracks. Intelligence agencies had failed to connect the dots, and social media companies had been slow to act on his increasingly dangerous posts. The attack exposed vulnerabilities in the system, raising serious questions about the nation's preparedness. Section 9. A call for action. Combating online radicalization and extremism. The attack on July 13, 2024, served as a wake-up call. It highlighted the urgent need to address the growing threat of online radicalization.
Governments, tech companies, and civil society organizations were urged to work together to combat the spread of hate speech and violent ideology online. There were calls for increased funding for law enforcement and intelligence agencies, as well as for greater cooperation between governments and tech companies.
The tragedy underscored the importance of early intervention and prevention programs. Experts emphasized the need to address the root causes of extremism, including social isolation, economic inequality, and lack of opportunity. The task was daunting, but the stakes were too high to ignore. The future of democracy, it seemed, depended on the ability to combat the forces of hate and division that festered online. Section 10. The Price of Hate. Reflections on a Tragedy Foretold. In the wake of the attack, the nation grappled with a profound sense of loss and a chilling realization. The seeds of hate, sown online, had yielded a bitter harvest in the real world.
Thomas Matthew Crooks, once a solitary figure lost in the digital ether, had become a symbol of the dark side of the internet. His actions, however reprehensible, forced the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about itself.
The attack served as a stark reminder of the power of words to incite violence and the responsibility that comes with online platforms. It highlighted the fragility of peace and the ever-present threat of extremism, both online and offline. The scars of that day would remain, a constant reminder of the price of hate and the importance of vigilance in a digital age. Section 11. Preventing the next Thomas Matthew Crooks, a shared responsibility. The story of Thomas Matthew Crooks is a tragedy on many levels. It is a story of individual alienation, systemic failures, and the devastating consequences of unchecked hate. But it is also a story of hope, a call to action.
The lessons learned from this tragedy must not be forgotten. Preventing future acts of violence requires a collective effort, a shared responsibility to combat extremism in all its forms.
We must be vigilant in identifying and addressing the root causes of radicalization. We must foster a culture of empathy and understanding both online and offline.
And we must work together to create a world where individuals like Thomas Matthew Crooks, consumed by hate and despair, find support and guidance instead of a path to violence. The future depends on it.